During this video, we are going to be covering the assimilation of immigrants into America. How do they become more Americanized? We're also going to be talking about the way that Americans reacted to the immigrants and how some of it was negative and discriminatory against the immigrants. And then we're also going to be covering the Chinese Exclusion Act. Upon arrival in Ellis Island or in Angel Island, many immigrants chose to stay in the cities where they landed, especially if they found a job opportunity there. By 1900, Lower Manhattan was the most crowded place in the world, and you could see the pictures down at the bottom and just how many people and how chaotic the streets of New York already were in 1900. And here is another picture of the Lower East Side in 1900. You could see, just how crazy things were in the streets, how many people were there, how congested it was, how dirty it was. So it was not the glamorous lifestyle of a city that you would think of in New York City. And then once again, another picture. This time it's just been restored in color. One of the things that immigrants did as a survival mode for a lot of them upon arrival in the U.S. was to settle in communities with people of their own ethnic groups. So they chose to live and to reside in areas in big clusters of people that they were either familiar with or people from their same country, same nationality. So that's when you had the development of like Little Italy or Chinatown. So all the Italians, all the Chinese would stay in one congested area, and that would create little areas in a city that were ethnically different from the rest of the city. So even though you were in New York City, you had different parts of New York City that would almost take you into another world or into another country. And that raises the topic of assimilation. Now, assimilation doesn't happen overnight. It's not like you're going to have an immigrant that gets to the U.S. and all of a sudden they're Americanized and they forget all their cultures and all their tradition. Assimilation is a process where a minority group adopts the customs or attitudes of the majority culture. And in this case, they're adopting the customs and the attitudes of the American culture. However, many immigrants did not appreciate the fact that they were being forced to assimilate or they were being pressured to assimilate, and a lot of them chose to hang on to their customs and traditions, but it was not an easy task. In fact, many of them were discriminated for not being American enough. And since Americans feared that immigrants would never truly assimilate, they began to create laws and they began to act out in ways that kind of pushed immigrants down and made them into secondary citizens. So, for example, Asians were prohibited from buying land in California. You didn't want the Chinese to get too settled and to become permanent, so if they can't buy land, then they're not going to be permanent official residents. Chinese immigrants out in the West were also frequently attacked and killed by racist mobs. So that's something that you don't normally think about when you think about Asians today. But back in the day, Chinese immigrants were, looked at or viewed at as incredibly useless, low-class people. Here is a political cartoon of the Missouri steam washer pushing out or chasing a Chinese man, and they're going from San Francisco to China. So basically it's saying the Chinese must go and saying, like, we don't have any jobs here for you. We're going to be hiring Americans. We don't need you. You need to go back to your country. If any company did hire Asians or Chinese, many times the Americans in the particular area would choose to boycott this particular company, and this is the perfect example of that, where if they're hiring Chinese, we're not going to be supporting you financially, hoping to drive you out of business because you employed a Chinese person or Chinese people. And that leads us to the Chinese Exclusion Act. And we covered this a little bit yesterday, but this is the cover of a magazine called The Wasp. And WASP stands for White Anglo-Saxon Protestant. which is what you kind of think of as your typical American, your true American, I guess. The Chinese Exclusion Act barred immigration of the Chinese laborers for up to 10 years. Eventually, it was renewed every time it was up to expire, and it was officially repealed in 1943. But look at how long it lasted, from 1882 to 1943. So for many, many years, the Chinese were discriminated against out in the West by Americans and the U.S. government. And in this political cartoon, you can see that you have a Chinese man that is sitting outside of the Golden Gate of Liberty, where he's locked out. He's not allowed into the U.S., while the sign in the back is saying that, if you're a communist or you're a socialist, you're more than welcome. But if you're Chinese, I'm sorry, you're banned. And this cartoon over here, you can see this was an American Fear, where you have the two Americans, two white men that are attached to the log, and the Chinese are setting fire to them. They fear that the Chinese were just going to take over and kill off the Americans and control the land, control the economy, control their jobs, things of that nature. So this was a fear that kind of prompted the Chinese Exclusion Act, or that prompted the lynch mobs to harass and to murder innocent Chinese immigrants. And here is your final cartoon of the Chinese man scaring Uncle Sam, that they have skeletons in their closet. So again, Asians were not very welcome in the U.S. Even though you did have discrimination against the Italians or the Jews out in the East Coast, the Chinese definitely had a different type, a more violent discrimination that they faced out in the West versus the East. So your notes are complete if you're able to answer the following questions. Upon arrival, where do the immigrants settle? And then why do they choose these areas to settle? What is assimilation? And then what are some of the anti-American actions that were taken against the Asians? And that's particularly out in the West Coast. And then finally, what is the Chinese Exclusion Act? Make sure your notes are complete. Don't forget to answer your blog, and I will see you guys tomorrow in class.